Right. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening again. Welcome to our BIPS uh, webinar for October of 2025, Iran and Afghanistan Towards a Connected Literary History with Dr. Aria Fani. And rather than infringe on his time, I'll come through this rather quickly. Dr. Fani is an associate professor of Middle Eastern languages and cultures at the University of Washington, Seattle. In Seattle, he directs the Middle Eastern Center at the Jackson School for International Studies and co-leads the Translation Studies Hub. His first book, Reading Across Borders, Afghans, Iranians, and Literary Nationalism, was the winner of the ACLA's 2025 Renee Wellick Prize for the best monograph in comparative history and was published by the University of Texas Press in 2024. The book details the dynamic and interconnected ways Afghans and Iranians invented their modern selves through new ideas about literature, adabiyat. Reading Across Borders is available in both Iran through a Persian translation published by Shiraz Press and India Sanctum Books in New Delhi. Aria is the co-translator of Shape of Extinction, a book-length collection of Bijan Jalali's poems. In addition to teaching and research, Dr. Fani engages in social advocacy for non-citizen Americans, particularly asylum seekers from Central America. And therefore, without any further ado, the floor, metaphorically speaking, is yours. The speaker will allow some time for questions and such, but again, all those questions are relayed through the chat. And therefore, without further ado, off you go. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Newman. I'm really grateful to you and the British Institute of Persian Studies for this invitation. I've been following their work for quite some time, and I'm really honored to be here and give this talk. So in this talk, I will briefly talk about the main arguments of the book, go through the 4 chapters, again, do so in a very concise manner. And what I really want to do is focus on the conclusion of the book, because while the study begins in 1895 and ends in 1945, and I'd be more than happy to justify those dates, the conclusion really needed to bring the subject matter into the 21st century. And that is, if Iranians and Afghans in the early 20th century mobilized themselves along the lines of new concepts and discourses, an important one of which is adabiyat or literature, then how does that mediate the connections and exchanges that go on between Iranians and Afghans in the 21st century? And so this is what the conclusion does. It looks at 2 travelogues, one by an Afghan scholar who travels throughout Iran, and one by an Iranian scholar who goes in the other direction. But before all of that, allow me to begin with this. This is an image of the forced displacement, or the nation state parlance deportation of 800,000 Afghan residents of Iran. Just let that sink in. 800,000 Afghans that have called Iran their home for decades. And I have to say that this has brought me so much pain and so much shame and so much disgust, because I wish I could say this is just another nation state. This is just the Islamic Republic of Iran. Unfortunately, it isn't. It's also people and their bigotry and their xenophobia. And I want to say that because my connection with Afghanistan, the reason why I have been a student of Afghan culture and literature, can never be abstracted from my connection with Afghans as a people, the people that have come into my life and enriched the way I think, and the people that I call friends and colleagues that I cherish. And so their well-being matters to me a great deal. And there already is an impression that academia is divorced from real life, that what we do doesn't have ramifications, that knowledge production is the pursuit of the elite. But I will show you in this presentation that these two brave intellectuals who dare to cross into one another's territory, knowing the perils, the dangers, the impressions that nationalism has created, can expose them to all sorts of interactions and all sorts of dangers. And so while I critique them, I want to be very clear that I'm also inspired by their courage, and I hope that they inspire you too. So this is the book, came out 2024. It was based on a dissertation that I completed at the University of California, Berkeley. It is a conceptual history of the notion of literature or adabiyat. And the argument that I make in this book is that in the late 19th century, adabiyat was necessarily a context-dependent derivation of adab, of these systematized forms of knowledge that were associated with adab, how one person would acquire and be in possession of adab. So imagine the different sciences of prosody and rhetoric and bookkeeping and all sorts of other sciences were all put under this umbrella of this plural term called adabiyat. And what happens in the late 19th century, early 20th century is that in contact with European forms of knowledge, Iranians, Afghans, Turks, Arabs, South Asians, Central Asians, they begin to reconfigure their literary tradition in order to create the modern European notion of literature. And by that, I mean a prized canon, a prized corpus of imaginative works that embody the civilizational achievements and national character of a unitary people. And so race is very much baked into it. Now we can discuss what race means in these contexts, but particularly the notion of an Aryan past, of an Aryan lineage. And civilizational discourse, another term that has undergone massive conceptual realignments in this period as well. And so the way in the course of 50 years, this concept is made into a freestanding, independent, and totalizing discourse is a monumental cultural undertaking that I argue thus far had not been fully examined beyond just cursory gestures to how adabiyat accrues a different function and different meaning in the world in the 20th century. And so the characteristics of this new discourse, one is that it poses itself as timeless. You know, we could talk about literature, and here I want to distinguish literature as a discourse with all of its norms and taxonomies and genres, and not to mention the institutions that preside over its proliferation, its teaching, all of which cannot be disentangled from the nation state, right? Adabiyat is the nation. Adabiyat is taught in schools in a monolingual national language, right? And so it's recently, especially in comparative literature circles, it is no longer viable or acceptable to talk about the concept of literature in these universalizing and timeless manners. And so one way I try to contribute to that already rich and textured discussion is by showing how the concept of adab, or the proper form of our ethics and our aesthetics, lingers, how it persists in the modern discourse of literature. And you could very much see that in the way people dress, in the way we interact, and whatnot. So let me then move right into the first travelogue. And what I want to do is, while I will maintain this conversational kind of style, I will also read certain sections of the book so that I'm precise and nuanced about what I want to say. So the first travelogue is written by the Iranian academic Dr. Amir Hashemi Muqaddam, who, given what I said about the forced displacement of 800,000 Afghans into a country grappling with famine, drought, and a tyrannical government that was gifted to them by US imperialism, is that this man, Dr. Hashemi Muqaddam, has been a fierce advocate for lifting medical visas for Afghans that want to come seek treatment in Iran, for intellectuals, poets, writers, academics that want to come and spend time in Iranian universities. And I really so genuinely appreciate how much he has done in order to make Iranians understand and appreciate the importance of Afghanistan, and not just as a place that so many of us in a misguided way call a part of greater Iran, but as a country in light of its own plurality and its own geopolitical anxieties and aspirations. Now, ultimately, my argument is that he fails in doing so, and that is because he clings on to this unproblematized or really insufficiently problematized idea of greater Iran. And I will read you a couple paragraphs to give you a sense of how Dr. Hashemi Muqaddam interacts with Afghans in the 21st century. So the title of the travelogue is A Trip to the Land of Aryans, Safar be Sarzamin Ariyaiha. In his assessment of nationalist narratives produced by Iranian and Afghan historians, Hashemi Muqaddam criticizes what he sees as the ideological excesses of both nationalist historiographies, but fails to question the discursive foundation of national history as a modern genre. For instance, he criticizes Iranian historians, no specific figures cited, who have appropriated the cultural legacy of ancient empires, particularly the Achaemenids, as Iran's patrimony, Iran's alone. He bemoans the fact that Afghan history textbooks in turn have framed the Achaemenids as foreign invaders and dismissed that as historical distortion, that Afghan historians like Ahmad Ali Kohzad did not celebrate the same ancient dynasties as Iranian historians is a recurring point of frustration and confusion for the author. Hashemi Muqaddam rarely meditates on the reason why he thinks Afghan historians did not flag these dynasties as native to the region that is today called Afghanistan. So his impulse there is spot on when he attributes these fault lines to national historiography, but he completely overlooks the fact that shared methodology with which these modern historians across these two borders constructed a national narrative does not necessarily lead to a shared outcome, and certainly does not lead to a common understanding of the past. And so that's why he just constantly lingers, and it becomes an obsession for him why Afghans do not celebrate the Achaemenids. The unstated assumption animating his work here is clearly related to the nation state. Hashemi Muqaddam is silent about the nation state's transformation of how Afghanistan and Iran were conceptualized as separate political entities. When he mentions the nation state, it is often in a celebratory light. In a lengthy footnote, the author compares Reza Shah and Shah Amanullah, contending that only the former managed to succeed in his nation building effort, in large part because he was able to persuade and recruit a cadre of intellectuals to make a case for his social and cultural reforms. So this assessment entirely ignores the systematic use of violence at the core of the Pahlavi dynasty's nation-building efforts, a project that valorized ethnicity, language, religion, and race above others. And I also want to say that it is very ironic that on the one hand, he praises Reza Shah, on the other hand, he fails to mention that one of the main reasons Reza Shah was successfully deposed by the British was because he disarmed and displaced the tribes, the nomadic tribes that previously the Qajars had relied on for conflicts and wars, because they were not there to defend him anymore, because they'd all been disarmed by him. Unsurprisingly, Hashemi Muqaddam's articulation of a pre-national greater cultural Iran بزرگ فرهنگی, as a civilizational sphere, as a civilizational space, does not account for historical contingencies or linguistic and ethnic differences. This is because his idea of greater Iran serves to connect a constellation of polities, peoples, and territories under a nebulous, freestanding, and timeless construct built on untenable ideas of cultural singularity and continuity. And as much as one would think that our field has moved beyond this, unfortunately, it hasn't. I think we have a very long way to go in order to challenge cultural singularity and how it operates at the heart of the field. The notion of greater Iran is amorphous by design, allowing the Iranian nation state, whoever it may be, the Pahlavis or the Islamic Republic, to conveniently appropriate heritages, territories that meet the demands of its present. Now, the provenance of greater Iran as a concept is very unclear to me, where it has emerged from. My strong suspicion is that it goes back to the writings of the uber nationalist intellectual Mahmoud Afshar, whose work is also full of adoration for Afghanistan as a part of this greater Iran, and riddled with bigoted and xenophobic and racist ideas about Azeris, about Turks, before them Ottomans. Again, part of a history that has not been sufficiently examined and problematized. And you could also see this very confused methodology and approach in Amir Hashemi Muqaddam, where on the one hand, he criticizes nationalist historiography and blames nationalism for the divisions that today exist between Iranians and Afghans and their respective nation states. But then he does not at all realize how problematic it is to label Afghanistan as the land of Aryans, overlooking the fact that that very period that he flags as the inauguration of these problematic divisions was also the same period that saw the formation of this idea of Aryans, which again, so many of our colleagues, including Reza Ziyara Ibrahimi, have examined, and we still have tons to analyze and understand about this issue of race. But it is very significant that the author just does not reflect on what it means to flag this land as a land of Aryans. Is it a linguistic category? Is it a racial one? Definitely hope not in the latter. But we've also seen that the former can easily be mapped onto the matters of race and religion. Next up, and this is the last travelogue that I will look at for you, is by Dr. Dawood Irfan, who wrote an extremely dynamic travelogue, bit by bit, posting it on Facebook, and receiving feedback and observations from his followers, which is really neat. A good use of technology, especially on a platform that has been used to enable genocide and tyranny and exploitation all over the world. It does not redeem that platform. Let me be very clear about that. And Dr. Irfan is also another figure that I have enormous respect for, having endured so much hardship throughout his life, having earned his PhD from, I believe, the Ferdowsi University of Mashhad, and the reality of an incredibly educated and competent Afghan scholar that cannot find a job in Iranian academia, again, because of xenophobia. And I wish him well wherever he is. I'm very happy that his travelogue is published. When I started working on it, it was just a PDF file that very generously he agreed to share with me. Um, you know, thinking that I might share it with others or it might leak out, but he still trusted someone he had never met. So I'm very grateful for that. Dr. Irfan's travelogue makes a few really, really important points. Number one is that in Iran, oftentimes he's hosted by anjumans or literary associations, not by universities, which shows that much the same way this discourse of literature proliferated through associational culture in the 21st century when there's dozens and dozens of universities in Iran. Anjumans are still the main unsung heroes of cultural exchange. And he cites poems that he hears in the mushairas and the poetic recitations, and it's just so delightful to read. And whereas Hashemi Muqaddam treated non-Persian speakers in Afghanistan with some degree of curiosity, but mostly evaluating them based on how well they spoke Persian. This is particularly visible when he encounters Pashto speakers. And overall, one can get the sense that uh, Pashto literary culture complicates as opposed to enriches this nebulous construct called Greater Iran. But Irfan is extremely different. Not only does he speak to different Iranians in his many, many travels all over the country in various accents, but I also found out that he speaks Baluchi, having hailed from the Helmand region. And I really, really admire that as well. Uh, Now, if not celebrating the Achaemenids was an obsession for Dr. Hashemi Muqaddam, Dr. Irfan's obsession seems to be that look at how Iran has enshrined and institutionalized these poets into a national pantheon, where the mausoleums of Hafiz and Sa'di and Khayyam and so forth. In Afghanistan, they are mostly collecting dust and they're not sites of national pilgrimage. But again, there is a lack of reflection on how we got to this point in Iran. Again, you have a nation state that used force in order to turn these monuments. Dr. Talin Grigor has done a great job of showing how destructive it was. In the case of, for instance, Hafiziyeh, the Hafiz mausoleum, you have a gravesite, a public graveyard that is razed to the ground in order to basically make a national pilgrimage site that celebrates this poet as the soul of Iranian Islam or of Iran as a nation. And so, yes, I totally understand and appreciate the frustration of an Afghan who has seen the beauty of Afghanistan, but also invite more critical reflection on the absence of a nation state that gets to ideologically transform society through architectural means as well as textual means and all the exclusions that are baked into it. And this is a part I want to read to you specifically about this. Irfan doesn't limit himself to identifying only similarities between Herat and Iranian cities, and this is one of the key features of the travelogue. Herat is very much at the heart, is the city to which every Iranian city is compared. He highlights key differences too. For instance, a big source of frustration for him is a lack of local or national tourism apparatus in Herat, particularly compared to major cities in Iran. He laments the fact that many historical monuments have fallen into disrepair and are endangered by car traffic, and city officials do not pay much attention to these sites. By comparison, early Pahlavi Iranians helped to transform the tombs of saints, poets, painters, and scholars, some of which were previously unknown or were part of a larger cemetery that was then controversially destroyed into sites of national heritage. The centrality to Irfan of historical monuments as fixtures of national and civilizational identity comes at the exclusion of ecologies, natural ecologies that have been devastated by the rapacious, unregulated capitalism practiced by the Islamic Republic. Ironically, a travelogue whose very title bears the names of two major rivers, Harirud and Zayanderud, is largely silent on the environmental crises that threaten those very rivers and their ecologies. And this is really getting to the heart of the matter, that whatever you may call it, Iran Shahr, the greater Iran, civilizational Iran, when it becomes a symbol of a civilizational expression, of a civilizational unit, it is bound to disintegrate under the most superficial interrogation, right? It will not take us anywhere. And if there is some sort of secular, post-secular Iran, I hope to God that these concepts are not enshrined into a new into a new regime and its institutions, because perhaps the targets of discrimination will change, the forms of discrimination will change, but discrimination, bigotry will remain very much alive. Toward the end of From Harirud to Zayanderud, Irfan asks, perhaps rhetorically, what type of allure does literature and poetry possess that it has so thoroughly dominated the mind and spirit of Persian speakers? And here I will mention the last salient quality of this travelogue, which is when he talks about the past, he is taking refuge to a period that he paints as extremely romantic, as one of tolerance, as one of coexistence. And again, without the attention, the critical attention that is needed in order to examine how we have gotten here. And even though there is some cursory mention of colonialism, where he famously says in his travelogue, "Damn these colonial borders," he puts the blame about the Taliban and their religious fanaticism on the Afghan people by and large, and not on the foot of U.S. imperialism, of Soviet expansionism. Today, Afghans and Iranians are far more connected than they were in the first half of the 20th century. Tragically, what brought this profound entanglement was a catastrophic war, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Several millions of Afghans were displaced internally and externally by a proxy war fought between the US and its allies and the USSR. At a certain point, 3 million Afghans were residing in Iran, a country involved in a long and bloody war of its own. In the past 4 decades, 2 generations of Iranian-born and Iran-educated Afghan artists, scholars, and writers have emerged, many of whom are scattered in different corners of the world today. Now, their work is slowly drawing critical attention in Persian studies. Now, I think when we look back, probably 50 or 100 years from today, one of the lowest points morally for the connected history of these two nations is the forced displacement of 800,000 residents of Afghanistan. Ultimately, one may ask, and this is my last paragraph, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. One may ask, what do Hashemi, Muqaddam, and Irfan teach us through their travelogues? This conclusion, this talk, framed them as two academics who remain beholden to the nation state in spite of having valiantly stepped outside their territories, both physically and mentally, to explore, understand, and appreciate the other, the racialized other. They have searched for fruitful ways of engagement with Afghanistan and Iran, not as two nation states sealed off from one another, but as a connected cultural zone. They remain on an ongoing journey to break out of the distinct, racialized, and antagonistic borders of the nation state. Now, I am by no means above their attachments to national pride or outside of their intellectual context as a humanities professor who continues to grapple with the lurking presence of the nation state in my teaching and discipline. By historicizing the work of 20th and 21st century literary scholars, reading across borders hopes to have created an anjuman of collective methods and engagements on literary nationalism and spurs us to imagine futures beyond it. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very, very much for the question, for the discussion. We're open to questions using the Q&A function on Zoom from folks. I had a question myself about these are contemporary examples, but I wondered to what extent we can trace this, or you can trace this back to the 19th century, and I mean, it's not just a new thing, but I would imagine that it has roots, 100 or so years ago, or perhaps not.
The connections and specifically travels in either
Well, just
direction.
perceptions of each other as these can be located in written or non-written forms.
Yeah, I have a curious example to share with you, Professor Newman. When Mahmoud Afshar in the 1930s was corresponding with Afghan literati in the Kabul Literary Association, um, he he even included a picture of Zahir Shah and was very deferential to the efforts that they're making in order to institutionalize Persian literature there. But in the same journal, of Ayande, when he talks about Afghans that attacked the Safavid capitals, he calls them a bunch of Afghans, savages, and so that tells you that cognitive dissonance of, wait a second, so are these the same bunch of Afghans that you disparaged? And if you so insisted that Afghans have always been part of the Kingdom of Iran, which was one of the most contentious points between Afshar and Afghan literati in the 1930s, then how do you understand the sack of Isfahan and the attack on Safavid cities as an invasion? Is it a civil war? And so this ambivalent and antagonistic approach has been examined from the other direction as well, how Pashtuns situated themselves within the discourse of Persian adab. And this is something that my colleague Nicole Ferreira has done by very much leaning into those stereotypes that, oh, you think we're savages and uncivilized? Okay, well, I guess that's our place within this discourse of adab. So very cleverly speaking back to this. And so this would be a very fruitful line of inquiry, how 19th century perceptions of Iranians and Afghans existed. That's something beyond what I have studied, but I will definitely be looking into it.
Because I myself, being interested in Shiism, I'm interested, therefore, in the lives, and the history of the Hazaras in particular. And having traveled through Afghanistan many years ago, across the Hazara Jat as well, I wondered how, or if there's fruitful discussion as to how Twelver Shia elsewhere in the world, let alone in Iran, perceived the Hazaras or did not. For example, did they fit in here? Were they recognized as distinctive or as part of a Shi'i family, as it were? When I teach about Shiism in Iran, I'm fond of saying it's true that most Iranians are Shia, but by the same token, most Shia are not Iranians. And kind of go, oh, wait a minute here. And so I just pull out some population data and say, so this is interesting, but lots of people don't think that way. But I wonder, on the ground, the Hazaras themselves, do they perceive themselves as part of something Iranian or something larger? And vice versa, the Iranian Shia perceive the Hazaras as Iranian or not, as the case may be. And I have no answer to that question. I just raised the question.
No, I'm writing down notes.
Yeah,
This is very interesting to me too. It's one of those cases where religion has a pull that offers identification with this broader collective, but then the idea, the ethnic or racial division, and particularly that of class, given that most Hazara Afghans that arrived in Iran were laborers, and so those exclude you and push you away from having acceptance and integration into larger society.
There's a question here about the dates for the 800,000 displacement that you referred to. When I remember that, but I don't remember the exact date. And here's a questioner asking for that as well.
It happened this summer.
Uh-huh.
It happened this summer. It happened after uh, Israel's assault on Iran, what became known as the 12-Day War. And a lot of people suspect that, having been humiliated, they basically wanted to take it on Afghans and expel them. Yeah, this is what Afghans have gone through in Iran for the past 40 years. In some periods, they've had some sort of legal stability, but they've been in legal limbo and barred from education. And my heart really goes out to people that now have to fend for themselves in a country that is ecologically under enormous duress.
Okay. I have a question here. Thank you for your insightful presentation. How do you think these literatures in your research could be used to help reconstruct some of the negative perceptions that young Iranians held about Afghans? I'm not Iranian, but I've noticed that some young Iranians tend to express some bias. For example, when they hear about a crime in the news, they sometimes assume it was committed by an Afghan.
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is something that actually Hashemi Moqaddam's entire introduction kind of deals with. And he's a sociologist, so much better equipped to statistically, empirically answer this question. But he looked at the statistics, and in terms of proportionality, Afghans in Iran do not commit more crimes than Iranian nationals. That is, for those living in the United States and also the UK, this type of xenophobic rhetoric is extremely common and familiar, unfortunately, to us. How could literature serve this perception? I think that Iranians and Afghans are increasingly meeting one another, collaborating with one another in their diasporic new homes, in poetic production, in artistic production, and most of the Afghans that I know in my life that I am in close dialogue with are also in these Western cities, and so that for sure has shifted my perceptions. What shifted my thinking on Afghanistan was an anthology of contemporary poetry that a friend handed to me when I turned 22. And so I can only at least speak about one person whose perception was changed.
Okay. Let's see, there's another question here. Thank you for a fascinating talk. I haven't read the book yet, but I wonder whether you've looked into how intellectuals and perhaps travelogues from Tajikistan also frame these histories. I'm thinking of Magnus Marston's discussion of how Chitrali laborers and Tajik Badakhshani migrants in the 90s and 2000s interacted and bonded with one another over their shared Persian literary history and how it reminded them of historic travelogues.
Wow, no, I had not seen that at all. I am quite ignorant of it. I just took a picture of it so I can return to this comment. I had not seen these travelogues, so I won't ramble. I won't ramble on to provide an incoherent answer.
Okay, all right, thank you. Um, let's see here. We've got a couple of comments here. You said that the Afghani traveler knew Baluchi. Did he travel to Baluchistan, the Baluchistani portion of Iran, and do you have any of his observations there about Baluchistan?
He did, he very much did, and that was something that connected him on a deeper level. This is really fascinating that this question is inviting me to delve into. So Dr. Irfan, tells us about all his interactions. He's on the bus, he's on a taxi, he's having conversations, and the moment people find out that he's Afghan, immediately the attitude changes because they can't tell based on how he looks. And some of those attitudes, range from microaggressive to downward bigoted. But what is so interesting is that once the conversation shifts from Persian to Baluchi in some cases, those divisions are minimized. then there's some sort of solidarity, perhaps a proletarian medium, basically shaping this discussion, right? They're speaking no longer as subjects of a Persian nation state, but as people that linguistically have been oppressed, have been on the margins. And Baluchi in Afghanistan has no official status. The only uh, regime in Afghanistan that took a really progressive approach to languages and linguistic inclusion was the ill-fated communist party that ruled for a decade or so. And so that is really fascinating, how the switching to Baluchi completely, uh, if not completely, but definitely removes a lot of those barriers of this racialized other that's come from this land. And he claims he's a university professor, and a lot of Iranians have a hard time grappling with that, which just shows the depth of ignorance that exists.
Thank you. I have a query about the 800,000 figure. What's your what's the word I want? Footnote for that versus say what UN organizations might be saying?
Last time I checked, which is when it was happening in the New York Times, and it was upwards of 700, close to 800, which is really truly staggering. But if the questioner has a different figure and a different source for that, I would gladly stand corrected, and
So
in the
they could send
future.
you an email, as it were. Okay, terrific.
Sure.
Um, here's I'm getting these muddled up here. You mentioned that Afghan history books claim I tend to the American spelling Achaemenians, but it's Achaemenids, as foreign invaders. How do the Afghan history books narrate their own foundational history, Sogdian, Bactrian, etc.? How do they see themselves?
So Afghan history is distinct from Iranian national historiography in a few ways. Number one is that in Iran, the advent of Islam is very much a point of bifurcation, where you have a pre-Islamic era that is very much valorized, where millions and millions of dollars are poured into it as an identitarian field to celebrate the glories of ancient Persians. And the post-Islamic period is very much distinctly different. That is not the case in Afghanistan. Afghans don't look at Islam as a force of rupture. They see it as just one more cultural or civilizational iteration in a long line that includes Buddhism and Greco-Roman and what it may be. And so that's one. And number two is you obviously have a lot of emphasis on dynasties that were geographically placed in Central Asia. I mean, this is the one of the paradoxes of territorial nationalism. You're trying to create a past that the present needs, and the present borders of a place dictate exactly what type of past it wants. Um, and yeah, the Achaemenids don't, have any sort of place, certainly not the place that they have had in Iran. Now, I also want to mention that it's been 21 years since I lived in Iran and was a student in Iran. I don't know how much the Islamic Republic textbooks are talking about the Achaemenids and the Sasanians either. If they have, in fact, taken a similar route to uh, the uh, the Hindutva regime in India, completely erasing the Mughals and the Delhi Sultanate in favor of constructing a mythologized Hindu India. If that is the case, then I wouldn't be surprised if the Achaemenids have been erased from Iranian textbooks as well.
Okay. A second connected stroke wider question is whether you find Persianate a useful spatio-temporal marker in what you're discussing, or are you using adabiyat as an alternative to Persianate, a term that of course has its own limitations?
No, no, definitely not. Definitely not adabiyat. I mean, adab. This is something that I go into in the epilogue of the book, where I say that adabiyat is very much concerned with being. You're born a native subject. You are consuming national literature as a point of pride, of civilizational pride. And adab, at least in theory, is about becoming, is about acquiring. That in theory anybody can possess adab, and if we don't romanticize it, and reckon with the fact that often it has been the normative subject of adab has been Muslim, male, and head of a household, then I think adab perhaps can open some doors. The Persian as well, if it serves again the way Iran Shahr and Iran Bozorg have, if it serves as a civilizational unit, as an identitarian fixture, then it's doomed to fail. But the field of Persian studies looks a lot more promising, a lot more capacious for transregional exchanges. And we've also had a lot of critical examination by the likes of people like Niall Green and Sam Hutchkin, and we need to keep interrogating its use and rein in its totalizing impulse.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see, we'll go down here. Right, thank you very much for your suggestive discussion. My question is about how culturally significant was Persianization, the phenomenon of Persianization, a phenomenon, especially during Arabic domination, in comparison with modern nationalism, especially underlying the political aspect of union perception, for example, in the colonialism of England and France. Is there a real connection as a cultural substract between, I'm losing this a bit, but between minorities in this process?
Not sure that I fully understand the question, so I apologize in advance, but nobody is disputing the fact that Persian has served as a lingua franca among so many different peoples, right? Among Hazaras, about Uzbeks, Baluchis, various Turkic peoples in Iran. Nobody's disputing that it was a major language of imperial intercommunication and literary production. But what is the problem is when it is enshrined as a monolingual within a monolingual constitution, enforced as such, when teachers have to be brought to places like Azerbaijan from Tehran to teach in a region where they don't know, or Azerbaijani teachers are trained in order to suppress even speaking Azeri in the classroom. That's where we run into massive problems. We have to accommodate multilingualism because that is the world. Monolingualism is fabricated, is manufactured, it's violent, and it is a byproduct of colonial modernity.
There's a question here about Zahiruddin Babur, who ruled Afghanistan for a number of years and is buried in Kabul. Is there anything remaining of his legacy?
Yeah, I mean the very term Afghanistan wasn't in use at that time. There was no Afghanistan in the same way there was no Iran at that time. Very nebulous cultural, geographical, imaginary concept. But yeah, the Babur, Bagh Babur, it's still in Afghanistan, is one of the more beautiful gardens there. He doesn't really hide the fact that he hates India, and he very much relishes the climate, the fruits, the landscape of Kabul. And whereas all of his sons and grandsons that went on to rule India as Indian rulers, certainly after Humayun, Babur very much saw himself as someone who belonged to that part of the world, the Fergana Valley, Kabul, and whatnot. And so, yeah, Afghans cherish his memory to this day.
Okay. And is there a difference, my own question here, is there a difference in, when you talk about the Afghans, are these people writing in Dari or Pashto? Is there any difference understanding the different groups, how they articulate their own history? Because it's a thing that gets made a lot of. Does it have any practical implications at this level of discussion?
I mean, in the period I look at, where Pashto is slowly emerging as one of the languages of the nation state, and this is a language whose print culture obviously goes back to well before the 19th century, right? But in this period, no, you don't really see a difference because it's all happening within the same institutional sites. Now, today, what is the attitude of people towards Babur and his legacy? Would it fall neatly alongside linguistic lines? I wouldn't speculate so.
Okay. Taking other questions here, if you have particular points that you wish to raise with Dr. Fani, could you, your email address is just uw.edu, as I recall, and so
Aria
you're most
Fani,
welcome to send in some comments directly to him. I'm sure he'd welcome comments and thoughts as well. Any
absolutely.
other kinds of questions that we've got here? Because we're kind of drawing a little bit to a close. Let me just see if I've missed anything that I haven't already covered. I think we're pretty much okay. Sometimes when people type in, it takes a couple of seconds for the actual showing up of these.
I appreciate you going through this for me because it's difficult to read the questions and think of answers. So I appreciate it.
Well, there you are. That's part of the thing, so that you don't have to think about these. Actually, try to read them and get them while you're trying to think about some sort of a reply. Well, I think this has been really very interesting. Having lived in Iran again many years ago, and then visited Iran more recently, and then also traveled through Afghanistan. There, I've really appreciated this discussion about how the societies really interact, and again, the notion of um, how this process has been, in particular, when you talked about adabiyat and its origins and its reference points to European literary canon. At the same time, I find that quite interesting and quite useful, even for my own work, which goes back to the I don't want to use, so we say early modern, the Safavid period in particular. So thank you very much. I want to thank you once again. I want to invite folks to the AGM talk by Dr. Raham Beglu, and that it will become available. There'll be some stuff on that on the social media sites that BIPS organizes it. But Dr. Fani, thank you very much. I realize it's quite early in the morning for you all, but may I bid you a very good morning, or to others a good afternoon, or to others still a good evening. And we look forward to seeing you again for future BIPS events. But again, many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for
You.
hosting me.